the podcast starts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast where we talk about horror, sometimes we talk about other things, and sometimes we swear. I'm TD Velasquez, but you, as always, can call me Dan, and I'm on my own at the moment, but I'll soon be joined by the wonderful Kirsty and the wonderful Howard Whittock, my fabulous co-hosts. But for a little while now, I just want to say I'm sorry because this episode came out late. It was supposed to come out last week, but on the other hand, it's now coming out this week, which is a week that we didn't plan to release an episode in. So in a way, it's a bonus episode, but that's a fairly pathetic way of begging your forgiveness for this delay, which was caused by a story too involved to go into, involving equipment failure and recording deadlines, not podcast recording deadlines, other kinds of deadlines. And it's all very stressful, and certain things had to be put on hold. However, we are back, and here is the episode. It's the main item for tonight is going to be a discussion between Kirsty and myself. It's another questions of horror discussion. We've done those before. This one was suggested by Kirsty. It's which horror films will you never watch or never watch again? However, before we go to the main topic of the episode, I want to play something which is usually comes towards the end. I want to go to The Bag of Death with Howard Whittock. The reason I want to play this first is because it's the first ever Bag of Death that we've recorded over Zoom, and to be honest, the sound quality is not great. I hope you'll forgive us for that. I intend that if we do further Zoom Bags of Death, the sound quality will be much better. And by the way, one of the upshots from last week's equipment nightmares was that I borrowed the microphone that I'm using right now from my friend Leah Marks. I've mentioned Leah on the podcast before. She was involved in the production of last year's Audible original horror drama called Sour Hall, and she also has a fantastic podcast for anybody involved in podcasting or voice acting or voiceover. It's called the Voiceover Social. I'd recommend it to anyone looking to set themselves up in that industry, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But yeah, so possibly because of having borrowed Leah's mic for this, the sound quality right now is better than you might be expecting, and hope that let's be honest, it will provide scant consolation for the fact that the sound quality you're going to hear in a moment from the Zoom call with Howard is far from optimal. However, and I've just had to switch mics, so that's why this sounds different. However, the next segment with Kirsty will have much better sound quality. So we're going to go to the Bag of Death section first, so that if you really can't handle the Zoom sound quality on that, you can easily skip ahead to the Kirsty segment. I'll put all of the time codes in the show notes to make that easier for you. So, because it's just me, because we don't have really any news to talk about, I'll go straight to the main items, but I will be back on my own at the end to give recommendations for this episode as usual. Okay? Enjoy. Howard is here, and we're doing the Bag of Death, as we often have before, but this is the first time we've ever done the Bag of Death over Zoom. How are you doing, Howard?
Yeah, well, yes. For a lifelong technophobe like me, this is quite an extraordinary. This is a great moment in my life. This is a scientific achievement comparable with the invention of the wheel, or man landing on the moon, or the discovery of penicillin, or that sort of. It's a major moment in history, and I'm terribly excited about it.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Howard.
Zoom, it's great.
It is.
I love
Yeah.
technology.
What would we do without penicillin or Zoom? Those things are often compared.
Yes, probably penicillin is more my favourite.
Fair enough. But what this means is that not only can we speak to each other, Howard, I can actually see you for the first time on this podcast.
It's nice to see you. We haven't seen each other about 16 months.
I know, it's incredible, and it's a wonderful sight to behold you all. Indeed, very strange times. But of course, not only can you see me, Howard, but also for the first time since we've started recording these, you can see in all its magnificence the actual bag of death. And I hope
Dun, dun, dun.
I hope you are thoroughly impressed.
I am extremely impressed. Oh, that's a lovely shade of purple.
With the magical bag of death.
I'd like a shirt that colour.
Well, I'd agree. It's more kind of burgundy. Okay, so
Well, yeah, I can't actually see very well because it's nice. No, I'd like a shirt that colour, maybe socks.
Right. Well, there we are.
It's very exciting.
The images we're conjuring in the listener's mind right now. Okay, so I shall plunge my hand into the bag of death and we'll see what comes out.
Yes. Lunge.
Okay. So, and rummage. Okay.
Oh.
I have something in my hand, a piece of paper, and it is the Blair Witch Project.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Yes, I didn't even know that was in there. Yeah, the Blair Witch Project. Yes, I remember seeing it when it first came out in 1999, and I think I was still at university when that happened. And I actually went to see it when all the furore had kind of died down a bit, because there was so much publicity about it and so much everybody was talking about it. And I thought, I'll wait till it kind of like the fuss dies down a bit so I can be a bit more sort of objective about it. So, yeah, no, I do remember going to see it. Yes.
Yeah, I have strong memories of seeing it at the cinema. I've already told the story on this podcast about how
I heard that, yeah.
how me and some friends went to see it, and I was terrified by it. Certain members of the audience were not too impressed. It was certainly a controversial film when it came out. In the terms of it, expectations were built up so hugely, so quickly, and then a lot of people went to see it and found that it wasn't their idea of a big movie.
Well, I have to say, I love it. I think it's a great horror film, and I've seen it several times since. It was weird because going to see it, when it finished, it's the only time that I've actually walked out of the cinema with everybody, and it's been absolute silence, been quiet. Nobody was saying anything. I think everybody kind of drained. I think I heard one man say, "God, I need a drink," as he was going out, and so did I. I needed one as well. But I went to see it. Yeah, after all, there was a kind of expectation about it, and it had been built up so much. So I wanted to kind of and I did enjoy it. Yes, I did like it. Yeah, it was very interesting because it was the first of that kind of what we call found footage films, wasn't it? And it was also the first film to be kind of marketed on the internet as well, which was kind of in its early stages then. And that's why it's sort of like, and I'm sure there were some people who did think it was all real, although it's obvious from the beginning it's not. But yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily obvious. I think if you went into it believing that it was a real, the cover story that the film tells you at the start, that, some students went into the woods and went missing, and this is the footage that was recovered, you might initially think, oh, I'm watching a documentary. But then as you start to notice maybe some little lapses in acting and things like that.
Well, that's it. I think I did notice. I think just sometimes you can see people acting, or kind of like improvising that sort of way. So I think I could sort of. I mean, when I went to see it, I knew it was all right. but I did really like it, and I did think it was. And what struck me scary about it wasn't so much all the Blair Witch stuff. It was these three young people go into the woods and they can't handle it. They haven't got their mobile phones, everything like that, and they can't be outside in inside. There's a bit of deliverance a bit when people go out into the miles, into the countryside, and they're completely out of their comfort zone, and they don't know how to deal with it, and they start to get all kind of like tense and sort of argumentative, and they all start to fall out, and sort of that to me was because I think films always work better if they got some kind of subtext to them, or they're saying something. And I think Blair Witch is saying something about kind of modern society, that people have now become so urbanized and they're so dependent upon technology that they've kind of removed from the natural world, and they can't, when they go back into that world, they don't really sort of they can't deal with it. They're completely sort of outside of their own experience, and sort of like so I thought that was kind of like really effective sort of thing. That's how that idea that they can't handle just being those woods. I know scary things happen to them when they walk around in circles and everything, but I just think that was like a really clever idea of these young people. They think they're so smart and they're so savvy and they're so sophisticated making this film, but when they actually get out there into the woods, they just can't deal with it. And that's the kind of thing about Blair Witch I really like.
Yeah, it is really effective. I mean, Heather has some dialogue where she says something like, you know, we're a modern developed country. You can't walk for this long without running into somewhere. You know, that there isn't, we've mapped this whole country. There isn't so much wilderness anymore, surely. And the film is kind of about that, that sense of taking our urban environment for granted and not really being able to deal with being outside it, and thinking there is nothing outside it, almost thinking that's all there is. And I have to say, I really like the film as well. You know, Kirsty and Stella and I did list it among our scariest movies. I think all three of us did, and I've watched
I think it is. I think it is. It is one of the scariest films I've seen. It is a scary film, and every time it's still scary. It still works.
Yeah, but not in a kind of jump scare, set piece horror kind of way. But in that kind of
unease.
Yeah, and that Nigel Neal-esque gradually building sense of dread. You know, that really builds to a pitch.
Grows.
Yeah.
I mean, there are one or two things that I kind of think, oh, that's slightly a bit doesn't quite work. Like when he throws the map away, so it doesn't. Michael throw the map away, and I thought, well, I don't think he'd actually do that. I don't think you'd do that. I think that's kind of a bit of a contrivance just to get them all more sort of arguing with each other.
Yes, to escalate the
tension. I know it seems to be quite divisive now. Some people don't like the Blair Witch Project. They think it was overhyped and there was too much about it. But I think it. I just think as a film, if you ignore the hype, if you put all that hype away and all that publicity and all that stuff, and just watch it as a film, I think it's a really, really brilliant, horror film, thriller, because it does make you feel kind of unease and this kind of disquiet, and it gets more and more disturbing, and that's what a horror film should do. It creates this sense of this kind of honest feeling of what's going to happen to them, you know, and that final image at the end, but you know what happened. That's kind of shock. I mean, I felt drained when I just watched it in the cinema. I felt drained. I felt kind of like worn out by what had happened, and I don't usually feel that with horror films. You just but I think it really worked, and I think it's a better film than kind of people just think of it as a kind of like horror film, found footage film. But I think it's a I don't want to say it's a better film than the people making it thought it was. I think it works really well, and it's just as relevant now as it was then. I think I'm babbling actually now.
No, I think everything you're saying is salient, and I think in a way it is insulated against becoming dated, because even when it came out, it was already supposed to be, 5-year-old footage that had been discovered.
Yes, yeah.
It's a period piece, and it's shot using the cameras of the time, I think. And I do think it's a really impressive achievement, and I'd love to watch it again. I think, listener, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong on this by the time this part of the podcast is released, but I think it is available to watch for free on the BBC iPlayer. Certainly, it was quite recently, and I think they put it up there for a long time. I'll put an update about that in the show notes. But if you haven't seen it, do watch it. I'd love to watch it again myself.
If you haven't seen it before, definitely watch it.
Yeah.
What the two guys who made it? What did they do afterwards? I don't seem to know what they did after they did Blair Witch Project. Did they make anything else?
I don't think they made another film together. I think one of them has made a few movies that have not had a huge impact, but apparently are very good. I think it's Dan Myrick, one of the directors. The two directors were Eduardo Sanchez and Dan Myrick. And I think Myrick, they both kind of became more producers and produced a few TV and film projects. But I think Dan Myrick has actually directed a couple of movies which didn't really have a huge impact, but apparently are quite good. And I can't say what they were, unfortunately, off the top of my
I'll
head.
have to Google them later.
But again, I'll do some research on that and put it in the show notes.
It's quite courageous because they actually gave these three actors all the cameras and everything, kind of told them to get on with it. And that would have been a complete disaster. If somebody had given me a camera and said film something, it would have been catastrophic. I wouldn't have known I think that was a really kind of like quite a brave thing to do, to give the three actors the cameras. But it worked brilliantly. I mean, it really did work brilliantly. And you really got the sense that they were there on their own and there was no film crew around. I think.
Well, there was no film crew around.
You do know that they were alone. There was no crew. It was just them filming it all. And the two guys' noises or whatever stuff outside their tent. But there's that sense of it's actually happening. They are kind of improvising. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't really know. They sort of have told, I suppose, what's going to happen.
Well, they were only told day by day. Apparently, they didn't know at all what the overall shape of the story was. And I think it is an incredibly impressive feat of organisation just to do that, but do it in such a way that you're going to end up with a movie. Because even though they were spending very little money, they were still spending money in the order of thousands of dollars. And
it could have been horribly wrong. It could have. It worked out really well. You get the sense that these three actors are actually genuinely sort of getting pissed off with each other and getting annoyed with each other, and the arguments kind of feel a bit sort of real as they're spending all this time together and all these things are happening. You get that tension, and you feel that tension between these actually genuine. And they became millionaires. All the actors became millionaires for this film because they were all on a percentage of the box office.
Well, frankly, I am very glad to hear that. I think they deserve it. And I also know that none of them have gone on to have acting careers. So, I hope that what they're doing. I think Heather Donahue might have gone into property or something. No, she obviously came out with a lot of money.
I thought she had grew medical marijuana.
Oh no, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I'd heard that. And the other two actors were Joshua Leonard and Michael Williams. When the movie came out, I always used to say Michael Williams, not to be confused with Judi Dench's husband, who had just died. But nowadays, if you say Michael Williams,
they're not very similar. He's Michael Williams.
But now you have to say not to be confused with Michael Williams from The Wire, who is Michael C. Williams.
Oh,
and for that reason.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, or is it Michael K. Williams? I'm getting confused. But I think he played Omar in The Wire, and it's pretty great. But Michael Williams from the Blair Witch Project has disappeared, and I hope is living comfortably somewhere, having a nice life, because they've
be doing some TV or something.
I don't think any of them are in the TV or film business, or at least not in front of the camera.
Oh.
But you know, they contributed something that will last and that has a massive cultural impact, and we'll be talking about them.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about them forever.
I think it's great. I think it's a great and important and influential horror film. And see, what happened was it was a film that depended upon the wasn't gory, that kind of did rely on suggestion and shadows and things like that. What's actually happening? A few years later, we had Saw and Hostel and all those sorts of like torture porn stuff, where the screen's filled with blood and guts and everything.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, well, they didn't follow the Blair Witch path of doing something kind of a bit more trained. A few years later, horror cinema kind of went into all sorts of blood and guts stuff, and which is my sort of thing.
Well, it's always going through phases, isn't it? Horror, and it also is very, very difficult to pull off that kind of suggestion-based horror. Not everybody is Val Lewton, and actually, the number of great movies that do that, there aren't actually that many of them. Although they are my favourites of the genre, really. I'm thinking about movies like The Haunting, The Innocents, Halloween.
Yes, The Haunting.
And all the Val Lewton movies, but everything can be like that. Howard, I think we've talked for 20 minutes or so about the Blair Witch Project. Just before we wrap up, can I ask you, have you seen either of the sequels?
No.
No, I haven't.
I don't think I don't think you can do a sequel. I don't know how you can do a sequel to the Blair Witch Project, because the ending is so kind of perfect. And the film itself is so kind of perfect. There's nothing you can add to it. You can't extend that story. It's just kind of perfect as it is.
I think you might be right.
I haven't seen it.
No, I probably watched the Adam Wingard one, but I hear that neither of them are great. I do think a better sequel to the movie does exist, which is, although it's not really a continuation of the story, it's like a parallel support piece, which is the TV documentary that Sanchez and Myrick made called The Curse of the Blair Witch, which is really good.
I have seen that.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it? It's like, it's a wonderful companion piece. And then if you look at the supporting book, which was released, called, I think, The Blair Witch Project: A Dossier, that really fills in the kind of mythological background of the serial killer Rustin Parr and Coffin Rock and all that. And it doesn't really take the narrative any further, but it just adds more kind of disquieting details to the mythology around it. And that's hugely recommended. I have no idea if it's still in print or not. But it was great. It came out at the same time as the movie. Well, there we go then, Howard. That's the Bag of Death on the Blair Witch Project. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that film?
No, I just want to say.
No, I just want to say.
Time on Zoom. So if I was a bit sort of uncertain, or I started sort of bumbling on, it's because I'm not quite used to this sort of technology. Because I've got these headphones on. So, So Blair Witch Project is a terrific film. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. I think it's a modern classic. I think it's up there. I think it's up there with Halloween and things like that, and Rosemary's Baby and stuff, and all those kind of several kind of horror films. I think it's a great film, and it will certainly unsettle you and disturb you, everything. And it is a favourite of mine. In fact, I might watch it. I might watch it tonight because I haven't seen it for a while. So that's what I got to say about Blair Witch Project on Zoom.
Nice one. And I don't think there could be a more appropriate movie to talk about on our first Zoom than a movie which depended on an innovative use of the internet to make its impact. Well, that's the Bag of Death, the first ever Bag of Death on Zoom, and what a pleasure it was. We'll be back next time with another randomly drawn film from the bag. Bye-bye, Howard.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye, Stu.
So, Kirsty, hello.
Hello.
This was your wonderful idea, this conversation.
Yeah, I felt the need for a cathartic conversation about horror that bothers me.
Right. Well, oh, that's superb. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I think I'm sure we've both got a number of films in mind that we've either seen and never want to see again, or just won't go near. And I'm sure we've both made little lists. And I feel like the listener is probably going to conclude that my list is basically going to indicate that I'm a wuss. That's why I won't go near certain films.
But isn't that the tension though? That kind of, particularly as a horror fan, that I've certainly felt pressure in the past to sort of not declare the films that I won't see, because there's, that kind of aura of being like, kind of a hardened horror. I can take it. Whereas actually, I think all of us have sort of not guilty pleasures, but the inverse of guilty pleasures, films that we just won't.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I in a way, I would probably sum up my attitude to it as, do I feel like I could enjoy this? And a lot of the time, and the film might be a great work of art, or it might be incredibly significant or well made. But if you're not going to enjoy it, then, well, a few of my examples will probably attest to that. So, well, let's get into our list. My list isn't very long, and I'm thinking that other movies may suggest themselves as we go. There's possibly films that I purposely blocked out of my mind so that I don't even have to consider watching them. But I have a few. Would you like to go first, or shall I?
I'm happy to go first. When I was thinking about this, the first film on my list is actually the first in the franchise, which I've seen the first in the franchise, then I've now not watched any of the others on the basis of the first film.
Right.
Shock horror.
Go on.
That film is Saw.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
and here's why. And I was thinking about this earlier about what is it about. I mean, I saw Saw.
You saw Saw. That was one of the reasons it took me a long time to watch that film, was just I hated the tagline so much. Yeah. Dare you see Saw?
Yeah.
I just thought that's the most moronic thing I've ever heard. Possibly only in this country, but
I don't think I saw it in the cinema. I think I saw it probably on home release, sort of fairly soon when it came out. But and I enjoyed it as a kind of, as a thriller. The reveal at the end I thought was really clever. But what I found really difficult to deal with is, and again, this is what I've been thinking about today, is the suspense of, these kind of vignettes of these different kind of victims in these horrible kind of murder contraptions.
Sure.
And just kind of knowing that they're going to die in a horrible way, and in a very creative way, or in very creative ways, knowing that's going to happen, and just sort of existing in that cinematic space, waiting with them, I found really tough. And I think it is that difference between shock and suspense. And I was thinking about that Saw for me is comparable with something like Seven. And,
right.
Long-time listeners to the podcast will know that I'm a big David Fincher fan, and I loved Seven. But the reason, they're kind of, in terms of death and kind of, creative deaths, they're fairly comparable. But the difference with Seven is that, for the most part, is you discover the bodies and the murders after the fact. Yeah. So there's an initial kind of shock of, this horrible thing has happened to them, but that person is already dead. They're already out of their misery. And there's a sort of different response. Whereas, existing with characters whilst they're alive, waiting for their death.
Yes. Yeah.
I found that really hard.
empathizing with that level of suffering is
Yeah.
It's funny. You've triggered a thought that I remember that when Seven was first on TV in the UK, which is when I was at sixth form college. Lots of us watched it. I'd never seen it before. I thought it was amazing. But a load of my friends, who I will not name, because some of them I'm still friends with, bless them, were all talking about how the ideas were great, but they didn't like the fact that you didn't see anything, or it was all kind of off screen. And I did think, so do you want to see him? You know, well, I'm not going to say anything because it could be a spoiler. But do you know some of the imagery in it, that not in the film itself, but that it induces in your head, is extraordinary and nasty and stays with you. And would it have made the film better if they put that stuff on the screen?
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
And you know what? I mean, maybe there's a load of people who would say that it does, or at least there is an appeal to that stuff, which is why there are 7 or 8 Saw films. But like you, I've only seen the first one. In fact, it's not on my list, but I did think about it because I did enjoy. I think my attitude to the first one is just the same as you. I enjoyed it. It's a thriller. It's also kind of like a little. So low budget, it's like a little play, really. You know, most of it's just 2 people in a room, isn't it? And I can imagine it. I think Lee Wannell, who wrote it and also plays one of the main characters, didn't write any of the sequels. And I think it feels like it's a guy going, I'm an actor, but nobody will put me in their play. I'm going to write something for myself. So he does this little thing. And it really works. Also, it's Carrie Elwes, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Who we love of old.
Yeah, of course.
So it is kind of like the kind of low budget. If there hadn't been Saw 2 et al, then you would kind of recommend it to people who like 7 as like, it's like 7, but it's the low budget, dirty, less artistic alternative. But you know, if you really want to watch something along those lines and you don't have your DVD of 7 available, by the way, 7 was possibly the first film I ever bought on DVD, and I looked in my collection just yesterday, thinking about if we're ever going to talk about it. And I only now realise that it's not in my collection anymore. I think someone borrowed it, or I lent it to someone many years ago, and it's just never returned. So. Yes, but anyway, we talked a lot about 7, not so much about Saw. But I just, I completely empathise for your reasons for kind of avoiding the rest of the franchise on that one.
Yeah, and I'm sure. I mean, I know it has a kind of fan base, as most kind of franchises do, and I'm not unsympathetic to what I perceive, particularly with my job, is it's just placed in this kind of type of contemporary horror, although it's obviously is aging now, that kind of people getting into horror, teenagers in particular, use it as a way of kind of testing themselves against the genre, and I'm going to find with all of that, it's just not a thing that I realise I particularly like. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about the with 7, that in many ways my kind of love for Hannibal also kind of stems from that, because with Hannibal, particularly in the first couple of seasons, a lot of the murders are again in the off-screen space, and they are revealed, so there's not, for the most part, and there are exceptions to this, but for the most part we're not with people as suffering as they're dying, and so I'm much happier to kind of go with death as spectacle when it's
it's the aftermath.
yeah. And it's not that I don't find that horrific, it's just differently horrific, it's because it's less personal, I suppose. So
well, and I think it's less, this is personal taste, I suppose, but I think it's less torturous to the viewer, because it's inviting the viewer to imagine these horrific things and to be disturbed in their own way.
Yeah.
Whereas when you put the actual act on the screen, it's like you're trapping the viewer in their seat and like Clockwork Orange style, kind of forcing them to look, pinning their eyes open and forcing them to look at this stuff. And it's kind of an act of torture in itself.
Yes.
So therefore that contributes to my sense that this is not really entertainment.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's your first one. That brings me to my first one. Well, there's a nice link here. So the first one I've written down for films that I've seen but would never see again is also the first film in a franchise, and I didn't watch any of the later ones. And I think it's a film that is very closely connected to Saw, both in terms of when it was released and the kind of way it sits within the genre. It is Eli Roth's Hostel.
Yeah. I literally just removed that from my list because I thought I'm not going to talk about Hostel because it's similar ground, but
right.
As you were building up, I was like, he's going to say Hostel. Okay, yeah, so what? Yeah. Why? And why?
It's. I mean, I remember the time when Hostel came out very well, and it was when I had just started working full time for the first time since university. So after about 6 years of working either part-time or not working, being a student, I suddenly only had my weekends as free time, and for some reason the first weekend I decided to go to the cinema twice, and the movies I saw were Basic Instinct 2 which was a hoot, and and Hostel, which I knew nothing about. I was just going to the cinema with my good friend Finbar, who's still my friend, and he said, "Should we see this film?" And I said, "Sure." All I knew was that it was a horror film and that Tarantino was involved in the production. Eli Roth was not a known quantity at the time. So I watched the first half of Hostel, going, I have no idea where this is going. Absolutely no idea. And it's just like these American backpackers in Europe kind of wander around, and it could almost be like a frat comedy, as they kind of caper with prostitutes and have kind of weird run-ins with Europeans and stuff. So by halfway through, I was still going, where's this going? What's the horror? And then the horror happened. And then they all start to get tortured and continue to be tortured for the entire rest of the film. And there's some images in it, like one involving an eyeball, that still stuck with me. I've never watched the film again. I did find it good in the sense that I thought there was something psychologically disturbing about it. It wasn't just the gruesome torture, it was the fact that it kind of invited you into the mindset of the people doing the torturing of it, and the idea that it was like a corporate venture, that people would pay money to be able to torture Americans. That's the I found that yeah, that's funny as well.
It is funny.
There's a great bit in it, like one of the non-horror bits, where someone going into the building where all the torture happens, and you see another one of the customers, the would-be torturers, waiting outside, and it's actually Takashi Miike, the Japanese director. And as the character walks past Miike says, "Be careful," and the guy stops and says, "Why?" And he goes, "You could spend all your money in there." I did. There's loads of quality to it. It also has a sex scene in it, which is scored to a cover version of Willow's song from The Wicker Man. The bit with Britt Eklund dancing naked. Yeah. So obviously that got me on side, but it set me up for the shock, because in a way the fact that they use that song hinted to me that the film was going to go in a sort of folk horror or magical direction, which it so didn't.
No.
But yeah, so and I was gripped for the rest of it, and even though it was really unpleasant and everything, I cared about people and stuff. But I would never watch it again. I mean, there's the bits of it that were fun and that like the scene that I've just described. It's fun in my mind, but I don't feel the need to watch that scene again. It's like imprinted there. And it leads me on to the first on my list of films that I never want to watch, which is Hostel Part 2. I don't want to see that kind of stuff happen to a bunch of girls. Heather Matarazzo, and I don't think I'm familiar with the other actresses in it, but and I don't want to see that, and I don't want to see whatever the hell happens in Part 3, which I don't even know. But I'm not a huge fan of what we're moving into here is the subgenre of torture porn.
Yeah,
and you know, I do respect that if you do that stuff well, it's an effective piece of horror. It requires really good acting. You're not going to be emotionally affected by someone pretending to have their thigh drilled if they're not very good at it. You know, it's not just a case of makeup effects. It requires skillful directing and acting and things like that. But that's for exactly the same reasons with you and Saw. That's just not my idea of fun.
No. Yeah.
And horror films don't always have to be fun. And maybe as we go further down the list,
no, absolutely,
we'll reveal the fact that there's other ways in which films can be not fun for me.
Yes, but still enriching and worthwhile.
Yes, yeah. I mean, in fact, there are films that I think probably could be very, very artistically worthwhile, but they're also kind of grueling and horrific in ways that I'm not sure I could take. So it's more like I'd like to be able to watch them. I'd like to say I have watched them, but but I haven't, and I probably won't because I'm not. You know,
can I use the segue into discussion of another film on my list of I have seen but won't watch again, but purely because I think what you just said about it being kind of artistic and worthy and also grueling, it sums it up perfectly, which is Lars von Trier's Antichrist.
Right. Well, right. That would be probably on my list of films never to watch.
I did wonder as you were describing it. I thought, yeah. But so I did see Antichrist. I was actually lent the DVD by one Monsieur Rob Savage.
Okay.
Who had it? I think he bought it pretty as soon as it came out and was available. So I borrowed it off him, and I made with Sven and I watched it, and Sven had no idea about it at all. Right. We got to the end of that, and he just looked at me. And we went, "Thanks."
Nice. Oh dear.
So I mean, with Antichrist, it was. There were so many things about it that I love. So like Lars von Trier, particularly with something like Antichrist and also Melancholia, he has this beautiful kind of aesthetic sense. He does grand, kind of operatic, kind of devastating stuff really well. And there are a few kind of sequences in Antichrist, one involving a decomposing fox in particular, which sticks to my mind, which are just, kind of its death and its nature and its beauty and it's horrific and it's compelling, and it's wonderful. That said, it's the kind of, not to kind of give away too many spoilers, but there are some notorious moments in that film involving sexual violence towards the end, but it starts off as a kind of a tragedy, the death of a child, and I realise that this is one of my buttons, and I'm going to talk about this later. Is any death or harm that comes to children that is as a result of neglect rather than kind of supernatural? I really struggle with that. So that's Antichrist's starting point, and then it's about a couple sort of struggling to deal with that, that grief, and it's a really taut, well acted, compelling kind of psychodrama for the most part, and then just I think where it for me it kind of slightly loses its way, unfortunately, is in the third act, where it just takes a really, really hard left turn into horror, in a way that it's memorable for everybody who's seen the film.
Yeah, I mean, I've got half an idea of what you're talking about, and that's most of the reason I've not watched it. But I mean, so are you saying that most of the really horrible stuff happens towards the end? In a way, that would tempt me to watch the film, at least maybe the first half, so I get a sense of it.
See, I from my recollection, again, it's not one I've watched again, but from my recollection, I remember thinking, you know what, that last act isn't as horrific as I was expecting it to be.
Okay.
It plays much more into, I think, kind of safe genre kind of conventions at that point. What's much more horrific is just the first two acts. The way that the death of the child is handled and shot is in its own way shocking. And then the kind of the kind of performances of both Willem Dafoe, he's always good for your money, isn't he? And Charlotte Gainsbourg as well. They're both really, really compelling.
They're an incredible pair of actors.
They are. Yeah, absolutely. And so that kind of the way that their relationship kind of spirals in the second episode is really, really compelling and horrific, because it's kind of two people trying to deal with this really horrible loss, and there are again, as we're saying, there are quite a lot of there's suggestions of the neglect, or not suggestions, kind of outright kind of moments of child abuse and neglect in it, which is really, really tricky. So actually, I think the things that people were talking about Antichrist were being a problem, or were problematic for them, which is is largely located in the third act. I didn't find that horrific in the way that people talked about it.
Right.
The horror for me is earlier on in the film.
Okay, so
that's why I can't watch it again.
All right, well, fair enough. And it does make the point, which connects to some of the things I'm going to mention in a bit, that a really horrific moment is just a moment in the film, isn't it? But what makes it burn through your consciousness is the context around it, and what you feel about the people involved, and what you know about what's led up to it and things. So you can have the same moment of violence in two different films, in two completely different contexts. And in one film it's funny, and in the other film it's heart-wrenching or unbearable, So yes, I think you've touched on a movie that, well, firstly, it's a movie that makes me feel old, because Antichrist in my head is still a new film, but it's like 11 years old, isn't it? Maybe I still kind of feel maybe I'm getting around to it, but I can't imagine. I don't know. Maybe I'd have a go at least the first half and see how that goes.
Okay. Can I use this again, sort of slightly steer the conversation? But you talked about that being a film that you have decided this thus far not to see. Are there any kind of strategies that you have for kind of trying to figure out which films you will or won't see, or kind of coping mechanisms to deal with it?
That's interesting. Well, not so much these days, because you just deal with it, I suppose, as an adult. When I was younger, I would definitely kind of investigate the movie to try and just literally avoid the bit that I'd heard about, or I turned the colour off or something like that. There's a movie that has recently been sort of recommended to me, although with a fairly major caveat, is Justin Kurzel's Australian crime thriller drama called Snowtown. And basically I've been told that there's like a scene in it that's so horrifying that you'll have to stop and go do something else for a few days before you watch the end of the film.
Yeah.
But also my friend who said that to me said, but I did it and it's worth it. It's a good film. So it's kind of like saying it will mess with you, but if you've got the metal, you can take it and it's worth it. Like a challenge to one's fortitude. And I'm kind of vaguely intrigued to see it as a sort of test to myself. I don't really know what the content is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So but there are certain things, like mountaineers say, the reason to climb a mountain is because it's there.
Yeah.
Sometimes the only reason to see these films is also the reason why you don't want to see them. I agree.
I agree.
You feel like it's mocking you. It's kind of sitting there.
And again, particularly as a horror fan, because you have that, whether it's external or internal, that pressure to kind of go, oh, well, if I like this genre, I must therefore be prepared to deal with all of it in all of its colours and shades.
Yes.
And I think one thing I've sort of, you were saying earlier about when you were growing up you just deal with it. I have massive coping strategies.
Okay, so please tell me yours. Okay.
So I tend to be fairly aware of kind of new films as they come out, and particularly aware of kind of critical and kind of popular review of them and the way that people start talking about them, and and I'll see kind of images, probably parts of trailers, and kind of look at it and kind of go, oh, it's intriguing, but it seems a bit dark. I would again, earlier listeners of the podcast be aware that I didn't see Midsummer for quite a long time, and I only watched it because I knew we were going to talk about it, and I, and so I looked at it, and there was part of me that just thought, oh, it's so bright and colourful. And I know that all of that horror is going to be in the daylight, and I'm not sure that I can cope, particularly as a pagan. I'm not sure I'm prepared to go down this road. But it looked so beautiful. The images that I saw and the kind of gifs that I saw of the film, they looked so beautiful. I thought, okay, it's intriguing. I kind of want to see it, but I'm kind of a bit scared of it. And I hadn't seen Hereditary, so I knew Ari Aster's kind of aura, his kind of reputation as somebody who does really dark shit.
Right.
So there was that kind of bubbling around as well. And then what I tend to do is I kind of spend a lot of time sort of reading and thinking, kind of going, oh, okay, and I'll and I need a really long run up sometimes, so it might take me 2-3 years, maybe longer than that, I don't know, like the Serbian Film, for example, that's on a list of I'm never going to see that film, and I know that, but I've kind of gone through the process of this and got to the point where I've just gone, no, I'm not doing this as a thing. But the other thing that I do is I will, and this is like on my final approach, is I will find the synopsis of the whole film.
Okay, well, yeah, that's good. You therefore kill the context, don't you?
Yeah.
You're pre-prepared for everything. Yeah.
And Sight and Sound used to be really good for doing these kind of just really detailed synopsis of the film. So I read through that and I kind of go, right, okay, now I know what the film contains. Can I deal with it?
Yeah.
And so with Serbian Film, the answer was no.
Right.
I will not. No.
So I noticed that you and Stella were talking about the Serbian Film on Facebook, and it's called A Serbian Film, right?
Yeah. Or the Serbian. I don't know. Yeah. Either way, I'm not watching it.
I only heard of it through hearing people talk about it on the Evolution of Horror podcast, and it's already a few years old by then, and I was like completely unaware of it. I've not heard too much more about it, but it concerns like snuff filmmaking, doesn't it? And just like no, I think
No, but I think crucially for me that like it's not that per se that I object to. It's that plus children,
right? Okay.
And I'm just, you know what, I'm out. I don't need that in my life. And I realized again, thinking about my kind of responses, my justifications for why I feel that way. I really struggle with why somebody would want to make a film like that. And then I realized that now I sound like all of the grown-ups in my life growing up as a horror fan.
Yeah. I'm not blaming you. Well, I think it goes to show that we all have a level. I'm reminded of the phrase hedonic treadmill, which is kind of the I think it refers to kind of the psychological mechanism that allows you to feel things to become acceptable to you, so you can deal with either horrendous things, or you can get used to things that are maybe extraordinary. So the shorthand example is, so that every time you get on a plane, you're not going, oh my God, we're in the air all the time. And we are. I will describe myself charitably as weird and freakish and interested in dark and disturbing and things that other people would find completely not interesting and bizarre and off-putting. But also, I've got my own level beyond which there are certain things that I find off-putting and weird, and I will look askance at the people who have made that, even though I know from my experience that, like, the horror filmmakers and writers that I know are just in general lovely. And they're, you know, they're exercising their own inner darkness in a very creative way, a very healthy way, by using it creatively in storytelling or filmmaking or whatever. But maybe we've all got kind of a level beyond which we will not go.
I you know, kind of my mind is definitely called the Serbian Film.
Right. I mean,
I have to say, like, it's the one film out of all horror that I'm aware of. Like, I've not seen Human Centipede either. And it's not that I wouldn't, it's just the idea of it doesn't appeal to me at all. It's not that, like, no, it doesn't appeal. Whereas Serbian Film just makes me go, no.
No, fair enough. I'd like to say that, you know, my objection is not that it concerns snuff movies and things like that. I mean, you know, another movie that uses that in a fictional context is Mute Witness, Anthony Waller's 1994 thriller, which is, as I remember, I've not seen it for a couple of decades, but I thought it was terrific fun. But I don't really want to be made to feel like I'm in a snuff film myself, which I think is probably what will happen to me if I empathize with the characters in a Serbian film. I mean, I've heard people describe a Serbian film as the most horrendous film they've ever seen, the most disturbing. And yeah, there's I don't really want to be disturbed in that way. So
no, I mean, I even just me reading the synopsis, which is as far as I got, made me go, no,
right.
Just, you know, that was enough. Just reading the description was enough for me. Just, you know, in fact, I wish I could purge the memory of the words that I read from my brain.
Blimey, that's extraordinary. I'll just say, though, to sweeten the palate a bit, the fact that you chose one of your coping strategies is to read the sight and sound synopsis. Cozily reminded myself as a teenager and wannabe filmmaker, knowing that I should be familiar with the movies of Tarantino, but not really having the guts to watch them. So I went one better than reading the synopsis. I bought and read the entire scripts of Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, so I knew exactly what was coming. And then I watched the movies. And, you know, the guy then doesn't hardly show the violence on the screen for most of those films.
No.
It's like he's mocking me.
Yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? In terms of coping strategies and kind of things that we can do to try and help ourselves deal with whatever trauma we feel we're going to cinematically let ourselves in for, that actually doing all of that oftentimes results in you watching a film and kind of going, oh, okay, was that it?
Yeah, that's true.
And that, in many ways, okay, it obviously defangs the experience that you can have if you just approach it without any knowledge. But if it's a way of us, kind of negotiating and widening our kind of our viewing in a way that feels safe and manageable for us, then fair enough.
Yeah, I think sometimes having foreknowledge of the events in the story can make your enjoyment all the greater, which is why we watch movies based on books we've read. And, I think I kind of tend to avoid spoilers, but at the same time, sometimes you won't, you might not intend to watch a movie, but you've got friends who have seen it and think it's great and tell you everything in it, and you decide, well, I kind of know everything in it now, but I sort of also want to watch it. So you do, and that's got its own appeal, and that's why I forgive my friend Brendan for telling me in great detail the entire content of the movie Unbreakable, and then next week turning up at my house with the VHS and saying, should we watch it? It's like, well, why? But,
why? Because you have the whole story now. Thanks.
He practically reenacted it for me. It was great. It's like having the live Unbreakable one-man show in my house.
Yeah.
So
no, I have a kind of an anecdote. It's not horror related, or it kind of is horror related, but from my childhood about kind of the consequences of being forewarned, and the way in which some people, the person in this anecdote is my younger sister Vicky. Hi, Vicky. Vicky is always a sensitive soul, and even to this day she refuses to watch anything that she feels is going to make her cry. She just doesn't. Anyway, as we were children, and again this is going to age me, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves came out at the cinema.
Super.
And there was much discussion at school about this film, and some people have seen it and other people's hadn't. And when Vicky found out that, and again, apologies if I'm wrong, but it's been many years since I've seen the film. I think one of the characters gets their hand chopped off.
Yeah, and also I think it might be there's a character who gets his eyes put out as well. And
okay, it was definitely the hand thing.
Well, I think it might have been the same character though. But you don't see the eye thing. But I remember being like, I was 10 or whatever, and I remember being really disturbed by that when I saw it.
So somebody at school had revealed that this thing happened, this bit of violence happened, and it was this salacious thing that people who'd seen the film was like, oh my god, it's terrible. And so in our family there's lots of discussions of it, and Vicky, my sister, had gone, no, I'm not seeing that. But the first point at which she said that she's not seeing it, she doesn't want to see it, discussion about it happened in the car when my dad had decided to surprise us with a trip to the cinema. We didn't know.
Right.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. So we were having this discussion in the car. She said she didn't want to see it because of this bit of violence. And then we got to the cinema and my dad said, we're going to see this film. And she had to be dragged into the cinema, kicking and screaming and crying. So that's a particularly powerful memory.
Oh dear. I suppose that moment of your younger sister's sheer terror and resistance was probably more harrowing than anything in the film.
Oh yeah, and it's absolutely felt formative for her, because now she absolutely exercises total control over what she will and will not watch, and she will not be swayed. If she has decided that she's not seeing something, she won't be swayed. Even if we go, oh, it's really good and you really enjoy it, it's really no. So, shout out to Vicky, more power to her.
Yeah, good for her. Know your boundaries.
Yes.
And exercise your power. Great. You mentioned a film a little while ago, or rather a franchise that I've totally avoided, and I was going to mention. It's on my list. So now is the time to mention it. Yeah, it's The Human Centipede. It's just like, yeah, why?
Yeah.
Just,
yeah.
I almost want to watch them just to find out what the hell it is. But because it seems to me that the only concept is scientist sews people together in a anus to mouth fashion, and I don't know what. And that seems to be the selling point. I don't even know how that film got funded. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I'm with you. I think for me, it's. I mean, I've not seen any. I mean, how many are there? 2, 3?
There's at least 3.
There's at least 3. Okay, I've not seen any. For me, there are particular types of body horror that I just, I'm again. It's not the fact that I feel like it's too much. It's just I'm not interested. I'm just not at all interested. But what intrigues me, but not not to the point where I'd go and see it, is the whole controversy around the second one, where the BBFC basically went, we don't even know what to do with this one. Can't even give it a certificate. We can't suggest cuts to it in order to make it a particular, a particular rating. We just can't, which I find fascinating. But that's the one isn't it? It gets meta. It's about somebody who's watched the film and then he's trying to recreate it.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, which I love meta horror. So there's part of me that's intrigued by that. But again, I'm not so intrigued by it and its controversy to make me want to go, actually, I'll sit down and watch this for fun on a Friday night whilst I'm, I don't know, eating crisps and drinking beer. It's
yeah. I mean,
no.
Kim Newman does mention it briefly in his book Nightmare Movies.
Yeah.
And he basically says, look, I know it sounds like it's the most horrific film ever because of the central concept. And nobody wants to see that. But if you actually do sit down and watch it, it's like watching like a cheapo melodrama from the 40s about a mad scientist who does something stupid for no reason at all. So I'm thinking, right, so it's like Bela Lugosi's The Ape Man or something. So it's probably really boring, with a couple of random bits in it. Having said that, I will say that one of the main actors in, I think, all 3 movies, or the first 2 at least, is Lawrence R. Harvey, who was in that audio version of The Wicker Man that we listened to last year and talked to Anthony Mann, who directed it. Based on that, he's really good. So, it's not that there isn't some talent involved, but
of course, no, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just, I think it's that, that difference of just going, like with the Serbian film, that's I know it's going to be beyond my line, so I'm just not watching it. Whereas with The Human Centipede, I just don't feel there's enough in it to make me want to go and see it. So it's not on my no list. It's not even there. It's just there. It just exists in the world, and I choose to ignore it for the most part, except for conversations like this, or when I'm talking to my students about kind of horror and how horror is constantly trying to push the boundaries of what's acceptable and that kind of stuff.
Obviously it has a place in that kind of context, and it would be foolhardy to ignore it, but at the same time I'm just happy not having seen it, and I'm not saying I'll never watch it, but some really good goddamn reason has got to materialise. Such as Tom Six coming on this podcast.
Well, yes, I mean, I think if we would have no choice, right? So maybe we're going to lay down the gauntlet. Tom, if you want us to watch your films, then agree to be interviewed, and then I get us to ask you why.
That's all we ask, Tom. All we ask. Nice one.
We are going to regret it if that comes to fruition.
Maybe we're making a Pharisee impact right now. We'll just see. I quite like the excitement of that. You never know. So we've only got a few minutes left, so mention a couple more movies.
Sure.
I think with Antichrist, we were verging on this kind of territory. Another movie which I don't think I'll ever see, and obviously I've never seen, is Gaspar Noé's Irreversible.
Oh yeah.
Um,
That's on my list of I have seen but won't watch again.
right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I mean, and that's on the side of it sounds really good as a work of art. You know, it's about a rape, and it apparently depicts it in a hugely powerful way that makes you really upset, which it should.
Yes.
So therefore, it sounds like it's a very effective work of art.
Oh no.
However,
yeah.
you know, I think I can take it on trust that it would be a horrible experience. I'm not going to put myself through it.
No, it is. Yeah. It's a phenomenal piece of work.
Right.
Can't even. It's so powerful. And it's so well executed. And I remember when I first saw it, I think my sister recommended it to me. I'd not heard it, and I'd not heard of Noe either, so I'd got no context for it at all. The kind of opening scene, you know, kind of the film starts with this like tremendous amount of violence, the kind of, you know, Russian violence, that kind of level. Right. And he moves the camera around in a, you know, kind of really kind of creative way, almost sort of swinging it from I say creative way, it's very Fritz Lang from Metropolis, swinging it from James.
Okay, nice.
And, you know, it's kind of frenzied and really, really powerful and brutal. And you don't quite understand why is this attack happening? Why is this man being attacked? And then, of course, because of the chronology, you kind of get to the point where you realise why. And he, you know, kind of spends so much time kind of moving the camera around and dodging action that you kind of get used to that as a mode of delivery, or at least I did. And then when he, for 11 minutes, and that's how long it is, I think, doesn't cut away. Right. And just let this rape play out and fall. It's just, I mean, there are obviously discussions, and rightfully so, about, you know, the way in which suffering of women is used to motivate action of men, and how, you know, rape is a way of, you know, kind of bestowing kind of, you know, trauma to women on screen in a way that is problematic. I mean, and I totally get all of that, absolutely, and I take that on board for Irreversible, but it's such a powerful kind of depiction of that, and an unflinching depiction. And yes, there is the misogyny of, okay, here's a male filmmaker using this as a, you know, kind of conceit for his film, but it's, you know, it's not one to watch with the significant other.
Not a date movie.
No,
I mean,
definitely not a date movie.
Having not seen it, obviously, I would assume that it's more. It sounds like a deconstruction, really, of that trope of using rape in that way, and that's one of the. Is that? Yeah, would you agree with that?
I mean, possibly. Again, it's because I've seen it once, and I don't need to see it again. I don't. So I've not spent an awful lot of time thinking about whether, you know, the kind of critique of it. I'm sure that there are people who have done that, who have come up with, you know, some very eloquent and astute points about what it says about rape and the way in which rape is used as spectacle and as trauma for women and as motivating action, or a way of motivating male action in kind of popular culture. I'm not there to kind of put any pronouncement on it at this point, because I've only seen it once, but what I can say is it was a very affecting and very powerful kind of cinematic experience. And the kind of formal decision of kind of going, okay, earlier in the film we're going to, you know, have lots of mobility and lots of cutting, versus just, you know, not cutting and just holding, was really, really powerful. Yeah, and actually that leads me to, again, not a film that I've not, it's not on my no list, but a film that I am somewhere on the run up to in terms of my process. Okay, is Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale.
Right, her follow up to the Babadook.
Yeah, and you know, I love the Babadook. I think it's great. But The Nightingale is it's a revenge movie about rape. Right. And I remember again the reviews when I think it was Toronto that it premiered. Might be wrong on that one, but it was certainly kind of a big film festival, and you know, kind of people were saying, you know, that critics are walking out of it because it was just
right.
the depiction of rape they felt was too much. And, you know, okay, I get that, but surely it's different when it's in the hands of a female filmmaker, female writer.
Yeah.
Not maybe necessarily being used in that exploitative way. But I don't know. Again, I've not seen it. I'm on my run up.
Yes.
I've read the synopsis. so the next stage is watching it when I feel like I'm equipped to do so.
I mean, that's one I would like to see, although I didn't, until you've talked about it now, I didn't know that it was a rape revenge movie. I just remember hearing that people were very, very disturbed by it and it was controversial. But obviously, I also love The Babadook and I would like to see it. But at some point, I hopefully will.
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix. I think, which has been certainly. I've noticed it and then kind of gone, yeah, not yet.
Yeah, there's time and place for these things. Just going back to Irreversible, it actually, I don't know if it came out or it was just being shown at the university cinema, but it was screened while we were at university, and I didn't go to watch it, but a couple of my housemates did.
Yeah.
Not really knowing what it was. And I just remember how shattered they looked when they came home. And that's also contributed to me just going, right, I'm not going to hear that.
No.
I was correct not to go to the pictures today.
And consequently, interesting, I've not gone near any of these other films either. I've particularly avoided Climax because, again, I've read the synopsis and I know that there's, you know, kind of some children involved, and I just, you know.
Because Climax is the kind of dance-based one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you know, for a kind of interesting potential kind of companion piece to something like Suspiria, I think, okay, well, that would be really, could be really interesting, but I'm just not. And again, it's from, no big spoilers, but from what I've read about this, from the synopsis, the kind of child, you know, kind of harm, again, it rises out of abuse, neglect,
right?
And that's I'm just as a parent, and I think that it's got, you know, it was bad before, but it's just worse now. I've got my own children. I can't deal with. And again, that's one of the reasons why it's definitely hard on my no list, but not as hard as the Serbian film is Darren Aronofsky's Mother.
Okay. Right,
but which has got lots of kind of elements that normally I'd go, yeah, I'm down for that one, but no.
Is that also a child neglect situation?
Well, I'm not sure if it is specifically, but there's definitely kind of harm to infants.
Right, okay, I didn't know that. I have had that movie recommended to me, and I think I've got it recorded, so I was planning to watch it at some point. But
well, I'd be interested to know what you think of it when you watch.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I mean, Aronofsky. I still haven't even seen Black Swan, so
really,
kind of quite behind the times. I'm looking forward to watching that eventually. It just looks bonkers.
It is bonkers. It's great.
I just want to. I'm conscious that we're running out of time. I'm just going to give a quick mention to another movie that I feel like I should watch it, but I never have. And it's just a stomach thing. It's like Irreversible. It's not really a horror movie. It's on the art spectrum, but it's Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali's, and I don't even know how to pronounce this.
Andalou.
Oh, thank you. Just because
I have to teach it. It's right. Not a set, but I'm not allowed to not teach it.
Right. Okay.
So it's one that I every year have the pleasure of introducing to that craziness.
Right.
A group of bemused 17-year-olds. They just look at it and go, "What the fuck is this?"
Right. Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I feel a bit gypped that as a sixth former media student, I didn't get made to watch that. We did.
Darling, the sixth form film students are very different.
Well, okay. I mean, I was a film student too, but I'm sure in the media class they showed us things like Meshes of the Afternoon. You know.
And I love Meshes. So I take the opportunity to at the run up to kind of and Chandler show them Meshes because I think Maya Deren does a much more effective job at what Buñuel was trying to do with Chandler.
Well, that will explain why I've never watched it. Then I feel much better now. I'll class
Meshes
myself.
is a superior film.
Right. Okay.
So we kind of ended up in Ponzi corner of the podcast.
So there we go. But yeah, for horror listeners, for horror fans listening who aren't familiar with Untitled Chapter, it's not a horror film. It's a short art piece from the 40s, I think.
1929.
Is it that early?
Yeah,
God,
it is 1929. And
and has the famous montage image of a woman having her eye sliced open, but they actually use footage of the cow's eye being sliced open, I think. And it's just kind of done with intercutting. But again, I just don't want to see that. And it just thought of it just makes me go,
yeah.
But the reason I think I might get round to watching it is because I feel like possibly I should, because of its historical importance, and also it's short, isn't it?
Yes, and then if you like that one, then follow it up with Benoit's next film, which was Lars, which is an hour plus of similar bonkersness, which as a Catholic you're going to have particular resonance with. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Right. Okay. Well, I can see this being a fun evening, so maybe I'll schedule that for myself. I'll do a double bill sometime soon.
I'll get some wine, some crackers.
Right. Okay.
Do, surrealist double. Lovely.
My left brain is saying to me, "Dad, you're being set up," but it's fine. I'll just walk into that. Nice fun. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time, Kirsty, unless there's any other honourable mentions you just want to throw in.
No, not an honourable mention, but one other thing that occurred to me. So, again, regular listeners will know that Stella in particular, but also I'm kind of fan of true crime. I do love a bit of true crime, but again, it comes if it's anything to do with children. And if there's true crime that involves actual footage of the events happening, I really, really struggle. So I know there's a kind of a documentary on Netflix fairly recently called I'm just going to get it up now. Something about an American family, about a guy who kills his wife and his kids.
Right.
I don't know. And like I said, I watched the first 2 minutes and just went no. No. And then I can't remember the one that Stella was talking about in particular, but there's that kind of famous American cult, Kool-Aid people.
Oh yeah, the Jonestown.
Yes,
massacre.
Because there's footage of that, isn't there? She was describing it, and I just thought, I can never do this. I can be aware of it. I can know it happens, but I can never see or hear this footage of again it's because of the kids and just no. So I'm fine with true crime as long as adults are the victims. That's fine. I can deal with that. But children, no.
Right. Yeah,
so that's my honourable mention.
I understand that completely, and I'm just reading about Jonestown is horrific enough.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, I got through everything on my list, so
me too.
That was a fascinating discussion. I think we should have a part 2 to this discussion where we find out Ian and Stella's parameters. Let's say
they should do a 2-header as well, just those two.
Yeah. Well, I shall motivate them towards this then. Thank you so much, Kirsty. That's been a fascinating chat.
It's been lovely.
Listener, hope you've enjoyed that, and please get in touch if you think we're weird or we're feeble. Yes, or if you've got any different suggestions of things that you won't watch for whatever reason, because it's a really interesting kind of psychological area. We've all got boundaries as film fans and horror fans, and it's like a Venn diagram, isn't it? We kind of all cross over somewhere, but we all have big areas, big circles of our own. Well, all right. Thank you so much, Kirsty. And
Thank you.
Until next time. Well, hello everybody. I'm all on my own again to just bring you the recommendations at the end of this episode. Hope you enjoyed the previous sections. We'll be doing more of both of those at some point soon. As we discussed, Ian and Stella will also be discussing that question, today's question, and coming up with the answers regarding the movies that they will never watch or never watch again. And also, Howard will be back soon with more bags of death. So, this week's recommendation then. I was going to dip into the Shudder back catalogue once again this week, as I did in the previous episode, and just go through the many things on Shudder that I would recommend. I could have done that, there are a load more. However, something else caught my eye this week. It's 2 short documentary stroke video essays that are on YouTube, on the YouTube channel called Dark Corners Reviews, which is a channel after my own heart. It's mainly devoted to reviewing horror B-movies, I suppose, and classic horror, so you get consideration of universal horror, silent horror, hammer horror, and also a good deal of kind of 80s and 90s straight-to-video schlock horror as well, which is not too much my department, but those videos do tend to be quite funny. And occasionally you find yourself tempted to seek out a movie you'd never heard of before, so just for a laugh, like. But this month, or the last few weeks, they've done a couple of videos which struck me close to the heart, actually. One of my formative influences in getting into horror was the movie Cat People from 1942. Producer Val Lewton's kind of werewolf movie, or take or reaction to the werewolf movie as typified by 1941's The Wolfman, which was a Universal film. And given a low budget and a mandate to produce something similar, instead of coming out with a kind of cardboard gothic rip-off, he created this contemporary set, film noir influenced tragic love story, which is Cat People. I first saw it when I was about 11. I later read Kim Newman's BFI Film Classics book about it, and I became a huge fan of not just that film, but the whole cycle of movies that were produced around the same time by the same producer, Val Lewton. So Dark Corners Reviews have just produced 2 documentaries. The first one is called Val Lewton's Cat People Beyond the Shadows, and it's a half-hour appraisal of the movie. It's really well worth watching and had things in it both in terms of insight and behind-the-scenes knowledge that I didn't know, even though I'm very familiar with the film. And then more recently, they've done a great 40-minute documentary about the whole cycle of Val Lewton movies. Now, this guy, if you don't know, produced 9 films in this style for RKO Pictures in the 40s. And they're all remarkable and interesting. I've seen all of them. I think I've seen 6 of them. But I like all of them. I'm kind of annoyed with myself that I have never got around to the remaining 3. But the cool thing is that if you look at these documentaries and you like the look of them, then 3 of those movies are available for free streaming-wise in the UK on BBC iPlayer. So Cat People from 1942, the first of the cycle, I Walked with a Zombie, its immediate follow-up, and The Curse of the Cat People from 1944, which is the sequel to Cat People, but which is a very different film for all kinds of reasons, which are outlined in great detail in the Dark Corners video. It's basically, it's not a tragic horror romance like the original film. It's a kind of lyrical movie about childhood, but it is menacing and it is beautiful. And I've just rewatched it actually, and it's really well worth watching, and it has a remarkable, although most of the actors, the key actors from Cat People who survived the movie, do return in The Curse of the Cat People. The movie is really owned by the young actress who is the kind of main character, and she's fantastic. She's like maybe 8, and it's a really affecting performance. Yeah, so those are there to watch. I recommend the movies, and I recommend the Dark Corners reviews, and I'll put links to all of those in the show notes. So those are my recommendations for this week. The only other thing to say is, yes, our release schedule has been very erratic lately. It's going to continue to be so, I'm afraid. I hope that we'll get another episode out before Christmas, but no guarantees, I'm afraid. We'll do what we can, though. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much if you're a long-time listener who's stuck with us. Thank you so much if you are trying us out for the first time. Please do go back and listen to some of our other episodes as well. In terms of today's discussion of horror films you never want to watch, or that you did see but would never dare to watch again, please tweet us. We're at And Now Podcast. Or please email us at ambisoulslimited@gmail.com. That's AMBOLSLTD@gmail.com. With your own thoughts, because we can feed them into further discussions. That's it from me for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be back soon. I hope you're enjoying the lead up to Christmas, and you're not one of the people who've been very adversely affected by the storms of late, as indeed our own Ian has been. He was out of power in his house for a couple of days, I think, but luckily all is well now. Alright, thanks everybody, and well, you'll be hearing from us soon. Okay, bye now.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts, produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited, presented by Kirsty Warrow, Howard Whittock, and T.D. Velasquez. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music, and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law, and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details, or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.